Hi guys, welcome to the Art of Server. So today's video is about installing RHEL 8 or RedHat 8 or CentOS 8 with a server that has a LSI SAS 2008 controller. Now if you've actually tried that yourself and downloaded RedHat or CentOS 8 and tried to install it on a server where you have a LSI SAS 2008 controller, you're probably familiar with the screen you're seeing right now. Right, so this is part of the in CentOS 8 in this case installer flow where you have to pick a destination drive, and you'll notice under local standard disks there's absolutely nothing. Right, so the LSI SAS 2008 controller is basically not detected in RedHat 8 or CentOS 8, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to show you how to work around this so you can actually get it working. All right. So let me kind of first start by showing you this thread, which I'm actually the person who started this thread on the discussion forums on RedHat's website. And this is back in June, so I started this a while ago in hopes that maybe RedHat would change their mind, but unfortunately so far there hasn't been a very productive response coming from RedHat officials or representatives. But basically what's happened is that RedHat deprecated a bunch of drivers, LSI drivers, back in CentOS 7 or RedHat 8, and in RedHat 7. In RedHat 8, they officially removed those drivers. Now, some of this I can understand because some of those drivers they removed were just really ancient drivers for devices that I don't think anybody would be practically using these days unless they were doing some sort of retro compute, project or something like that using some ancient hardware. But included among those drivers that were removed were the drivers for the LSI SAS 2008, 2108, and 2116 controllers. And unfortunately, I think that part was a bad decision. And I say that because those are SAS2 controllers that are perfectly still relevant and useful even with today, especially if you're just using hard drives. They work perfectly fine for those use cases. But for whatever reason, RedHat has decided to remove those drivers. Now, this isn't a Linux kernel issue. The mainline Linux kernel still has support for those drivers, and that they're being maintained in the mainline Linux kernels. But and if you try to use a different Linux distribution other than RedHat or CentOS, you won't have this problem because those distributions didn't specifically remove these drivers from their kernel. And in fact, I think there was someone who said they tried the latest Fedora, which is kind of Red Hat's experimental distribution where they kind of do more cutting edge stuff. So even in the Fedora distributions, the driver was not removed. So for whatever reason, they decided to remove it from their enterprise Linux release. And so this problem is just really specific to Red Hat. So if you're using something else, you probably don't have to worry about this at all. But if you do want to use RedHat 8 or CentOS 8, and you have a server that has a SAS 2008 controller or 2108 or 2116 controller, you will encounter the screen that I just showed you, which is right here. Your disks won't show up because the controller driver is missing, and so the controller is not recognized by the operating system. Now, I started this thread back in June 2019 in hopes of getting some attention. And unfortunately, although there are several other people who participated in this conversation saying that they were affected by this change as well, there wasn't really a productive response from Red Hat. About the only response we got from, or this discussion got from a Red Hat person was maybe this person named Jamie Bainbridge. And his response was basically that if you are a paying customer, open up a support case, and let Red Hat know that this is a problem. So for those of you guys who are watching my video, in hopes of making some positive progress with Red Hat to kind of reverse this change, if you are a paying customer or you work for a company who is a paying customer of Red Hat, and this change, the removal of these drivers, does affect your environment, or you personally. I highly recommend that you contact Red Hat and open up a case as severity 4 is what Jamie Bainbridge recommends here, and let them know that this change has a negative effect on your environment. There are several people who have participated in this conversation, mentioning that this has slowed their adoption to RHEL 8 or CentOS 8 because of this missing driver. Now, okay, so that said, there is a workaround, and one of the I guess discussions within this discussion was by this person going by Akemi Yagi, who I think is a maintainer or some participant in the ELRepo repository, and they've created some disk driver packages that you can use to install Red Hat 8 or CentOS 8 on a system that uses one of these deprecated and no longer available drivers. Now, if you go to this link here, you will get a listing like this of all the available drivers that they provide, and these are basically driver disk images that you can use during the Red Hat 8 or CentOS 8 installation, so that the missing driver can be basically kind of side-loaded into the operating system and allow you to continue on and not end up in this screen where none of your disks are available. So I'm going to show you how to accomplish that today in this video, so that for those of you who do want to use CentOS 8 or Red Hat 8, you'll still be able to use the SAS 2008 controller. Now, this video was kind of prompted by this Reddit thread that I saw, where people are discussing the same issue basically. And I saw this one individual who responded, I guess 7 days ago from the day I'm making this video, where he says, "Is there a single write-up that shows how to use the ELRepo driver disk? That thread in the Red Hat forum doubles back, rehashes drag cut issues, touches on the driver setup, and it's just all over the place. I'm having a hard time even figuring out where to start." So I don't know who you are, but hey, I feel you. I know people who are not used to installing Red Hat or CentOS with a driver disk. The process isn't the most intuitive, and it doesn't always work the way you expect. And so I'm going to show you how to work around that today, and show you step by step on how to get the ELRepo drivers working when you are installing Red Hat. Today I'm going to actually use Red Hat 8.1, or sorry, CentOS 8.1, which is going to be roughly the same as Red Hat 8.1. Alright, so first thing first is that you need to go to this directory. And by the way, I'll leave a link to this Red Hat forum discussion in the description of this video. If this issue affects you, I do recommend that you go to this discussion thread and participate in it. So I'm hoping that maybe the more people that participate in this conversation, hopefully it might get Red Hat's attention to actually look into this issue more deeply. And again, if you are a paying customer, or you work for a company that's a paying customer that is affected by this issue, please go ahead and open up a support case. I think that would be a sure way to get Red Hat's attention if there's enough customers that are reporting a problem with this change that they made in Red Hat 8. Okay, so but anyway, let's say you want to go ahead and install using the ELRepo driver package. Well, you get this huge listing, and it's not the most intuitive in terms of well, what do you need to do here? So I'm going to help you through that. Now, there are a lot of different controllers that where the drivers are missing, and in this video I'm specifically going to focus on the SAS 2008, because that's kind of a very, very common IT mode HBA that a lot of people use for Unraid or ZFS or those type of things. And so I'm going to really just kind of focus on that. But if you have a different driver, you're probably going to need a different driver image here. But if you've been messing around with LSI stuff in Linux, you know that the driver is MPT2 SAS. And so you might look through here and you're like, well, hey, there's no MPT2 SAS. There's an MPT SAS, so maybe that's it. Maybe that's not. There's a megarate _SAS, and that's probably for the SAS2008 RAID controller, is my guess. I haven't actually tried it, but I think that's probably the one for that. This is the driver for that particular RAID controller, if that's what you have. Now the one that we're going to need is actually this MPT3 SAS. Now this might be a little bit confusing because for the longest time, MPT3 SAS driver was really meant for the SAS3 and newer LSI controllers. And there was a MPT2 SAS driver that was for a lot of the LSI SAS2 controllers. But in the latest kernels, Linux kernels, a lot of the MPT2 SAS drivers were merged together with the MPT3 SAS driver. And so the single MPT3 SAS driver now supports all the SAS3 and the SAS2 controllers as well. So that's where it might get a little bit confusing. If you're looking for MPT2 SAS, you're not going to find it here. And what you're going to need to use is the MPT3 SAS driver image. Now, there are two different ones here. There is the EL8_0 and EL8_1. And that's because you're going to need a different one depending on whether you're using RedHat 8.0 or 8.1 or CentOS 8.0 or CentOS 8.1. I'm going to be installing CentOS 8.1 today. And so the file that I'm going to need is this one, the MPT3 SAS that ends in an EL8_1.LRepo.iso. Now I've already downloaded this file, but I just wanted to point that out to you that that would be the file you need to download. Okay? Alright, so let me go ahead and close that window, and let me go ahead and just power this. So obviously we can't really move forward on the installation in this case, and so I'm just going to go ahead and power this off right now. Alright, so what we're going to need to do is attach that driver disk image, and you can do this in multiple ways. You can take that image, put it on a USB drive, you can burn it to an optical disk of some sort and insert that into your server if it has an optical drive, or insert an additional USB drive that has that disk image. I'm going to use, since I'm using a Java virtual KVM here, I'm going to use the virtual media mechanism to do basically the equivalent of that. So here I'm going to pick CD-ROM and ISOs. This is an ISO file. I'm going to go to downloads where I've already downloaded this file. So that's the dd-mpt3 SAS ISO file. I'm going to click on open. And I have to click on plugin to basically enable that image to be connected to the server. Alright, so at this point that image should be connected to the server. The server also has a USB flash drive where I have the CentOS 8.1 installation USB drive. I'll click on OK. Now normally, so I think we can go ahead and power this on now. So let me go ahead and do that because that's going to take a few seconds while I talk here. But normally during the installation, the installer should detect another storage device that has I think a OEM DRV label and automatically detect that the driver there's an additional driver disk image available that it should use or try to use. I've found that that doesn't always work reliably, and so I'm going to show you how to make that work a little bit more reliably. So let's let this machine post right now, and it's going to go ahead and start up the CentOS 8.1 installer. Okay, so here you'll see the LSI BIOS posting, and so this is probably familiar to you if you're used to seeing this stuff. So this is just confirmation that I do have a LSI SAS 2008 based SAS controller in here in IT mode, and you'll see that in a second here. The firmware will be listed, and the 8 drives that are directly connected to this controller will also be listed. Alright, so here you'll see that the SAS 2008 and IT mode is there, and there were 8 hard drives connected to that controller. Alright, so we should start booting the CentOS 8.1 installer momentarily here. Alright, so here is the installer boot up, and normally it might be a good idea to do the test this media and install CentOS 8, but I've already tested this installer USB drive. I know it's good, so I'm just going to go to the install CentOS 8, and here, because we're going to make some modifications, go ahead and hit tab. Okay, and so now you'll get the grub boot line here, and what we need to do here, so normally you don't have to, well, the way this is supposed to work, you don't actually have to do what I'm about to show you. But what I've found is that it doesn't always detect the extra driver disk that you have connected. And so in order to kind of force it to scan and look for that driver disk, you need to add another option here to the boot kernel. And you go inst.dd, I believe. And that should force it to, so I'll hit enter, and that should force it to scan for a additional driver disk. So we'll let that boot up, and okay, so this is so by the way, when you're kind of side loading an additional driver during the installation, it's unfortunately not as clean. You don't always get to work within just the GUI interface. There is kind of this menu interface that you have to work with. So you'll see here a list of devices. There's SDA1, SDA2, and so that's, by the way, that's just the USB installer. So that has nothing to do with it. Now we attached it as an ISO image as a CD-ROM, so it's actually SR0, and you'll see it's an ISO 9660. But here's the problem. See, normally this label section should say OEM DRV, and that's what it scans for to automatically detect a driver disk being available. But for whatever reason, it doesn't really show up until later, where it detects the driver label or the disk label. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pick 3 here, so that it's going to examine that. Okay, so you'll see that it looked into that disk image, and it found this driver KMod MPT3 SAS. So there's this additional RPM that will provide that missing driver that we need for the SAS 2008 controller. Now you'll see this interface isn't exactly great, but you'll see here in the square parentheses there's a blank. Well, that means it's not selected, so you actually have to select that. And in order to do that, so this is number 1, so we're going to hit number 1. And so now you'll see an X inside the square parentheses. That means that driver is selected. That means you're telling the installation program to install this driver during the installation process. So now that we have that selected, we can hit C for continue. Alright, and so you'll notice, like, right after that, this label shows up. Okay, this is what we needed in the first place for it to automatically detect this driver disk, but for whatever reason it takes a while, and so during the install it doesn't seem to work. And so I found that, like, I have to go through this manual process in order for this to work. But now you'll see the OEM DRV, right, label, and had that been there in the first place up here, it would have automatically detected a lot of this, and we wouldn't have to go through these steps. But for whatever reason, that's not working, and so you kind of have to go through the steps I just went through. Alright, so at this point, we've already selected that driver, so we can basically continue and hit C. Alright, so after this, it's basically the usual installation process. So we'll let this installer continue to boot up. Alright, so now we're in the usual, the beginning of the usual installation process, where you have to pick a language and, locale. So we'll click on continue here because I'm in the United States and English is the default here, so that's works for me. Alright, and so you'll see that under here installation destination is not selected yet, and this is normally where if we select this we see no disks available. So hopefully we'll click on this and there you go. So all those Maxter drives that I have connected to the LSI controller are available. Alright, so I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and just pick the first one. It doesn't really matter at this point. This is just for demo purposes. There might be something on there, so I'll do a custom. And alright, well, okay, actually it looks like there's nothing there, so let's just automatically create a partition scheme. That looks okay. So we'll go ahead and click done here and accept the changes, and then, oh, you know what, I'm just gonna, since this is just a demonstration, I want to just install the minimal installation so it doesn't take too long. Alright, and so at this point, let's see, oh, you know what, well, not that it really matters, but I am in California time, so I'll change that, and that's it. So we can kind of begin the installation. So anyway, I'm going to let this installation continue to run. It's going to take a few minutes here, and then I'll come back when it's done installing. Okay guys, we're back here. The installation is now complete, and let's go ahead and reboot this. I want to show you what the driver looks like in the installation itself, and I'm going to show you what changes when you run updates on the CentOS 8 or RHEL 8 installation. Alright, we're fully booted up in the new CentOS 8.1 installation here. I'm going to go ahead and log in. Okay, so let me first show you what that driver disk looks like on the system. So basically it installs this kmod package. So the kmod-mpt3 SAS, that is the package that has the driver for the LSI SAS 2008 controller. And if we run a, let's see if I can, so if we run a listing of that package, you'll see that it sets up a configuration file, and the driver is located in this directory right here, so it provides this directory structure, and there's, I think, some documentation that goes with it. So this is really important here. It's basically included in the default 8.1 kernel's extra subdirectory for all the kernel modules. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like here. Alright, so right here, this is in /lib/modules where all the kernel modules are located, and we only have one kernel on this because this is the initial installation of CentOS 8.1. And if we go in here, there's a listing of a whole bunch of other stuff, but the driver for the LSI SAS 2008 from the ELRepo package is under extra, and it's mpt3 SAS. And so this is the location of the kernel module that was kind of side-loaded using the ELRepo package. Now, one thing to note is that because this is kind of side-loaded, if you look at the kernel messages, you will notice that it says loading autotree module taints kernel, so module verification failed. So you're going to see this because it's a third-party kernel module. It's not part of the original kernel package. So that's something that is to be expected. So if you see this message, don't worry about it. That is kind of just the way it is. Now, if RedHat decides to include the kernel or this driver within the their kernel release, then you wouldn't have this message. But anyway, now let's go ahead and actually update the server, because I want to show you something that's kind of important since we're using like a third-party driver here. So let me just make sure we have a network connection here. All right, let me turn up this connection. Okay, so now I'm connected to the network. Let's go ahead and run an update on this system. Okay, so you'll notice that amongst the updates available is a new kernel package, right? So, and this is the reason why I want to show you, what to, I guess, be aware of as you're maintaining a CentOS 8 or RHEL 8 system. So we're going to go ahead and apply those updates, but basically the new kernel package obviously is not going to have that driver, but it is going to get included from the kmod package from ELRepo, but it's going to be included as what's called a weak update, and I'll show you what that looks like. And there's something to be aware of so you don't accidentally end up deleting the driver, because if you do, then the system will no longer reboot or boot up properly upon reboot. Alright, so the updates have been applied. There was a new kernel installed, but it's not running yet because we have to reboot to do that, but I'm going to also install a couple other things here. Oops, looks like I misspelled that. Alright, and just for confirmation, I'm going to show you that I do have a LSI SAS 2008 controller on this machine. Alright, so let's go ahead and reboot the server so that it loads the new kernel. Alright, so we are now booted up with the new kernel, as you can see up here. Alright, so let's see what happened. Oops. So you'll see that we have this new kernel that's the 147.3.1, and that's the one that is currently running. And the original one was the 147.el8. Alright, so at this point, if we go into lib modules, you'll see that we have a directory for all the modules from the previous kernel, and then another directory for all the modules in the updated kernel. Now if you go into the directory for the kernel modules of the updated kernel, you'll notice that there is no extra directory here anymore. Instead, there is a weak updates directory, and you'll see that there's MPD3 SAS here, and there is a symlink linking to the original kernel module from the ELRepo kmod package. Alright, so that's really important to take note of, because at some point you might say, okay, well, everything seems to be stable here. Let me go ahead and remove the old kernel. So let's say we're going to do that. Alright, so let's go ahead and erase the old kernel. Okay, so I've just removed the old kernel packages, so you see it's no longer here. And if we do a listing of the kernel module directories, you'll notice that that directory is still there, although there's not a lot of items in it right now. So if we go in there, you'll see that it's mostly empty other than this one kernel driver from the ELRepo package for that LSI SAS 2008 controller. So it's really important that you don't accidentally say, oh, I don't have this kernel anymore, let me go ahead and delete this. So you don't want to do that, because this third-party driver or the side-loaded driver is going to remain in that kernel, and there's going to be symlinks from new kernel module installations to this location. So do not delete this directory, even though it looks mostly empty. Okay, so that's one thing I want to point out, because if you do delete that, then it's gone, right? And if you require that driver in order to boot, your system may not boot the next time you reboot. All right, so just wanted to point that out. Feel like that's kind of an important point. And since the kernel module, remember it's this kmod module, is from the ELRepo repository, it would probably be a good idea to also add that repository, so that if there are any updates to this kernel module, you'll be able to get them from the ELRepo repository. Alright, so that's it, guys. That's how you get your RedHat 8 or CentOS 8 installation done on a server with a SAS 2008 controller. Now, if you have a server with one of the other deprecated drivers, like the 2108 or the 2116, I believe the 2116 is also supported within this driver. If you have the 2108 hardware RAID controller, you'll probably want that other Mega SAS or Mega RAID _ SAS driver. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Okay, so yeah, up here, if you have the 2108 RAID controller, you'll probably want this Mega RAID _ SAS package instead of the one that I used in this video, which is the MPT3 SAS driver. This is the one you're going to need for the 2108, or sorry, the 2008 and the 2116. Alright, so anyway, I hope this helped you guys out. If you have any questions about how to do this or run into any trouble, leave a comment and I'll try to help you guys out there too. But anyway, I hope you liked this. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and be sure to subscribe to see more videos from me. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.